So this is Waddesdon Manor, home of the Rothschild, or one of the many homes of the Rothschilds, should I say. It was built by Baron Ferdinand de Rothschild between 1874 and 1885 to display his collection of art and entertain the fashionable world. It's been open to the public since 1959. And although it's owned by the National Trust, it is still managed by the Rothschild Foundation, which is a family charitable trust that works on behalf of the National Trust. I think this is probably one of the most elaborate and extravagant buildings that the National Trust owns, certainly that I've seen. There's this gorgeous marble fountain at the south of the building, and it's the fountain of Pluto and Proserpine. These figures come from ancient mythology, and it's actually the Romanized version of the Greek myth of Persephone and Hades. There's various versions of this myth, but one of them is where Proserpine is tempted by an extremely beautiful flower. And as soon as she picks it up, Pluto comes out of the underworld and kidnaps her. So there are some variations on how she gets down into the underworld, but they all end the same, with her married to Pluto and living in the underworld with him. This legend was used by the ancients to explain the coming of the seasons, and when Proserpina was in Pluto, then the land slowly became infertile and bleak because of her mother's sadness, and that was why it was called autumn and winter. And when she returned to the land, Ceres rejoiced, growing flowers and creating fertile land, which is represented by spring and summer. The garden was a big part of daily life for the Rothschilds that lived in this manor. Ferdinand inherited his love of the garden from his mother, Charlotte, and he describes that when they were children, they were all given a little plot of land as their own, and they were allowed to plant it as they wished. When his sister Alice went on to inherit the manor, she was also incredibly keen on gardening, and it's said that she carried a little weeding tool everywhere she went. She pioneered several new techniques to be used in the garden, including the concept of 3D carpet bedding. So a little bit about the history of Waddesdon Manor. It was initially built by Baron Ferdinand de Rothschild as he wanted an estate where he could escape from London in the summer months and entertain his family and friends for weekend house parties. It was also home to his huge display of artifacts and artworks. So he came into his inheritance in 1874 when he purchased the land. And in 1877, the first foundation stone for Waddesdon Manor was laid. He wanted the exterior of the house to be in the style of the French Renaissance chateau. When it was completed in 1883, it had running water and central heating, and electricity was added later on in 1889. He actually put a small passenger lift in when Queen Victoria came to visit, but apparently she wouldn't use it because she just didn't trust electricity, which was a very new thing at the time. Interestingly, aside from Waddesdon being used to house babies after the war, other than that, there was never actually any children in this house. Unfortunately, Baron's child died a year after it had been born, and his sister Alice never had any children and was never married. So this is one of the more famous artifacts in the house. It's an elephant that was made in London by the French clockmaker Hubert Martinet in around 1774. It plays 4 tunes when wound, and its trunk, ears and tail move. Unfortunately, it was out of commission when I was there, but you could hear it playing on the little screen next to it. I just gave you a minute there to hear the beautiful sounds of it. This absolutely stunning chandelier is actually the largest in the house, and it combines crystal and glass and dates from the 19th century. So we're walking into the breakfast room here, and you can see on the left there's a white porcelain goat with a suckling kid and a turkey on the right. These are one of nearly 70 different animals and birds that were commissioned in 1730 by Augustus the Strong. This incredible panelling on the walls was actually from 2 different Parisian houses, the Hotel Dodon and the Hotel de Espremenil. Hope I pronounced those right. This room was designed for the men of the house to have their breakfast, whilst the ladies would have eaten theirs in bed. The turkey actually symbolises wealth, so perhaps they knew what they were doing with those sculptures. So here we have the gorgeous conservatory, which leads through to the main dining room, which was where many of the gatherings would be held. I'm just doing a look back through into the breakfast room here, just so you can see how stunning the entrances are to all these rooms. So here is one of the 56 clocks in the building, all of them absolutely gorgeous as well, and many of them actually have music. It takes over an hour each week to wind them all up. So this is the main dining room, and it can seat up to 24 people. It's currently laid for 24. And Queen Victoria dined in this very dining hall, and she was very fascinated by the electric lighting. The marble panelling really adds a sense of opulence to this room. And a lot of the rooms have such interesting ceilings. Many of them even have paintings on the ceilings, or one of the rooms has a leather ceiling, and there's just always attention to detail in every area. So this is one of 2 tapestries that were woven in the 1700s. One depicts a fountain of love and one the flute lesson. So now we've come through to the red drawing room, and this was the main reception room for the guests that were arriving at Waddesdon. One of the interesting features of this room is the carpet, which was actually commissioned by Louis XIV. I like to look back on some of the rooms because all the doorways are so amazing. And again, with attention to detail on the ceiling, this one has an amazing painting on the ceiling. So make sure you look up when you walk around here and not just down. So we're just coming into the grey drawing room here, and one of the big features of this room is that small pot by the mirror, if you can see it. It's a pot-pourri vase from 1762, and the importance of this piece was that it was actually Ferdinand's first important purchase as a collector at the age of only 21. It's believed that only 12 of these were ever made, and only 10 are known to survive today, and Waddesdon actually owns 3 of them. So the grey room would actually be used for the ladies, whilst the men would go to the red drawing room for a glass of port. They would then rejoin one another for more conversation, cards, music, and the entertainment of the time. So this is the morning room, and was a room where particularly the gentlemen would get together and read the morning newspaper, and they would write their letters way before we had technology, typewriters and computers, and everything was done by hand. A lot of people seem to criticise this tall desk that we went past, but I think it's really gorgeous. I wouldn't want it in my own house, but I think it looks like an incredible piece of furniture. So this is one of my personal favourite sculptures in the house. It's located on the stairway, and I don't know what it is about it, but I just love it. So here's a painting with a lot of important people in, as you can tell by the dress, and there's a list of everyone in the painting to the right. And then there's also a painting of all the different locations where the Rothschild have homes. Now this is another one of my personal favourites. It's made with malachite crystal. I know that just by looking at it because I love crystals, and I just think this is an absolutely stunning piece. So we're entering the parts of the house that are laid out more like a museum to display the artifacts. So in this room we have a lot of pottery, and the Rothschilds were famous for their hospitality, and they had many dinner services. It would actually often take 400 pieces of porcelain to serve 24 people. Some of the sets were incredibly precious, and they even had a dining set that was a gift from King Louis XV to an Austrian prince in 1766. But the family was still using these sets up until 1980. Back in the 1800s, it wasn't uncommon for families to marry into the same family in order to keep the lines clear and the wealth, no doubt, in the family. Baron himself was born from a mother and father from different branches of the Rothschilds, and he married his cousin, Evelina. They did have a child who sadly died at the very early age of 1, and after this he devoted his energy to travel and collecting works of art. He was particularly drawn to 18th century France. When he died, he left his estate to Alice, who was his youngest sister. So his sister Alice was an incredibly interesting woman. She was everything that a woman of that era would want to be. She was musical, well-read, a polyglot, and an accomplished horse rider. But she just never felt the need to get married. She was very close to her brother Ferdinand. And when he died, she really made it her mission to preserve his collections and add to them as well. She was mostly responsible for the weapon rooms and the weapon collections, which we're about to see in a bit. Alice was fiercely protective of her brother's inheritance, and she's actually well known for establishing what's called Miss Alice's rules. These were her guidelines for the care and preservation of these collections, and the National Trust actually even used them as the foundation for protecting their collections even today. Here you can see a number of some of the most stunning items from the collection in this house. This was one of my favourite items in here. Just thought it was gorgeous. It's sometimes hard to capture the stunning beauty in these rooms, especially when some of them are a bit darker, but this is the green boudoir room, and these beautiful wall mirrors along with this panelling that's from Paris are aligned to face one another and create an infinity of reflections, which is a technique used to make a small room look bigger. This rather colourful chandelier is quite an unusual addition to the room, and it was made on the Venetian island of Murano, one of the most important centres of the production of glass. The design is called Siocca, which means a bouquet of flowers. So this is the blue dining room, and it actually has an incredible chandelier that's actually rather modern from 2003. It's made of broken porcelain and cutlery and was commissioned for the blue dining room in 2003. It was designed by German lighting designer Ingo Maurer and his manufacturing team, and to make it they dropped the ceramics on the floor, smashed them with a hammer, and then arranged them into this gorgeous shape. It's called Porta Miseria, I hope I've pronounced that right, and roughly translated it means oh my goodness. So we're now entering what is called the Bachelor's Wing. It was actually used as a main residence temporarily by the family when the main house was actually used to home evacuee children from the war. So this is the arms corridor, and you might think that one of the men of the house was responsible for this room, but it was actually Alice's passion, and the majority of the weapons were actually collected by Alice. You'll see as we go into this corner on the top left, there's a mask that looks like an animal. So this is also known from the witchcraft era as a scold's bridle, but essentially it was designed to gag gossipers. People whose tongues were too loose would be required to wear this mask as a form of punishment, and when they attempted to speak, it would come out as a whistle. You can also see a photo of these axes, and the volunteer in this area was very helpful, and he explained how the tassels on these were hardened, which means they would actually have been used in battle, and that was blood that had hardened the tassels. They were fitted because otherwise they became too slippery and they wouldn't be able to control the weapon. So these tassels held the blood and allowed them to stay in control. The ceiling of this room is made from leather. I told you to keep looking up at the ceiling, and it was an incredibly expensive job for them to fix this ceiling, as you can imagine. So this is the billiard room, which comes with a 19th century billiard table, accompanied by the scoreboard and the stand for the cues. So one of the interesting items in this room is in the corner here, and they have these in other rooms of the house too, and it's actually a post box. How convenient was that? So the letters would be put in here at these times, and as long as they were in here by 10:30 a.m. collection, then they could potentially be at Waddesdon station by 11 a.m. and making their way to London on the train. They could potentially arrive at Downing Street by 1 p.m. I think that's faster service than we get now, no? So, as always, they have a restaurant, cafe and shop, and I think it's much bigger at Waddesdon than at many other places. Wine actually plays a very important part of the Rothschild story here at Waddesdon. The Rothschilds owned several wine estates, and you can actually buy the wine here, do wine tasting events, and there's a big theme going on. So whilst you're here, definitely don't forget to check out the Aviary. I almost missed it out when I was here because of time, and I'm so glad that I didn't, because it really is a must-see. I actually didn't realise that it was filled with exotic birds. So Baron himself was actually particularly fond of birds, and many of them would actually come to the front of their enclosures to be fed by him. His sister Alice also continued this tradition. The Aviary is actually registered as a zoo, and it's full of many rare and endangered species. Aviaries were an important part of many of the Rothschilds' gardens all over Europe. It followed a custom when many rulers and noblemen from the late 1600s would own exotic birds and animals. It was almost a display of power, wealth and knowledge. It was designed in 1889 in a similar fashion to the trellis work pavilions that were designed for the gardens of Versailles. You can actually meet the aviary keeper between Wednesday and Friday at 2 p.m. every day and have a chat with him about the birds here and the upkeep of them. Unfortunately, I missed that time, but I would love to do that another time. So one of the final things you can see is the stables, which was designed by the same architect who designed the manor. This was designed in a 17th century French style, and there's now a cafe and a shop and a coach house gallery here, and it's very beautiful and definitely worth a visit. In the centre here we have a gorgeous bronze horse sculpture which is by Edgar Bohem. It's believed to be of the Duke Wellington's charger, Copenhagen,